You spent 7 years in prison.
More than 7. So 7.5 the last time. 12 all total.
12 total.
7.5 the last time.
The opening question cuts into the past like a sharp blade. Blood, tears, and the spotlight. Charles S. Dutton, from a 17-year-old murderer to a television star followed by all of America. From a dark solitary cell to a stage broadcast nationwide. ROC was not just a sitcom, it was a declaration. A bomb thrown straight at Hollywood. But behind the spotlight lay a labyrinth of secrets, hidden battles, with Fox fierce conflicts, with co-stars a broken marriage, and a truth he once swore never to reveal. The story has never been fully told. And now it is breaking the headlines. So, what is the latest about Charles S. Dutton from ROC that has shaken all of Hollywood? Not every Hollywood star emerges from the spotlight. Charles S. Dutton was different. His path began in the darkness of prison from a teenage brawl at 17 that ended in death and a heavy sentence. Few could have imagined that this very stain would open a journey that transformed him from a killer into a television star. So what truly happened in that fateful moment, and how could the cold prison bars lead to the dazzling lights of ROC? The darkness. At 17, the murder and 12 years behind bars. On a summer night in 1968 in Baltimore, a brawl that seemed harmless changed the course of an entire life. It was not a movie scene, it was real. A teenager of just 17 hot-headed with fists hardened by the streets, and a childhood spent slipping through alleys filled with violence. When the dust settled, one man lay motionless, and the one left standing breath heavy was Charles Stanley Dutton. That fatal blow turned a reckless boy into a murderer in the eyes of the law. From that moment on, every light of the future was instantly swallowed by the darkness of prison. Charles was born on January 30, 1951, in a poor neighborhood of Baltimore, Maryland. Trouble was no stranger to his family. The men around him, from his father to his uncles, were all hellraisers, rebels accustomed to life outside the law. Young Charles grew up in chaos, often skipping school, joining fights, and being sent to juvenile reform school repeatedly between the ages of 12 and 15. They called him Rockhead, the Stonehead, for his habit of throwing rocks and his stubborn defiance. That was Baltimore in the 1960s, a poor city rife with injustice crime lurking in every corner, and a lost teenager absorbing it all like daily breath. Then came the fateful night. At first it was just a fist fight, punches traded in a storm of shouting. But a knife flashed, and when it was over, Charles's opponent was dead. The law had no room for innocence. Charles was charged with manslaughter and sentenced to 5 years in prison. The image of the 17-year-old entering court with a half smile, as he later recounted, made even the judge shake his head. Charles showed no remorse, played no victim, and that defiance made the sentence even harsher. In reality, he served only about 3 years before being released. But freedom was short-lived. A few months later, Charles was arrested again for armed robbery. Once more, he returned behind bars, this time for a much longer stretch. Prison fights and defiance of discipline added years to his sentence. A brawl with a guard, which according to him ended with a handshake after a fair fight, seemed settled. But the federal authorities did not overlook it. 3 more years were added. Counting all cumulative sentences, Charles's life behind bars stretched to a total of 12 years. Long enough to bury every dream. In a later interview, Dutton uttered a chilling line, "I got 3 years for killing a black man and 8 years for punching a white man." It was more than a recollection. It was an indictment of the injustice rooted in the American legal and prison system. A murder took away 3 years, but a punch stole 8. For Charles, those years were not merely punishment, they were a living scar of a society rife with prejudice and violence. Life behind bars was nothing short of hell. At Maryland prison, he often defied orders, refusing to work for just 35 cents a day. His defiance landed him in solitary confinement, where he was allowed to take only 1 book. And it was there, between cold stone walls, that he stumbled onto a new path, instead of The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, which he had intended. Charles mistakenly picked up an anthology of plays by black playwrights. The sharp satire and laughter laced with bitterness made the rebellious prisoner laugh for the first time, and then awaken. It was a rare moment of clarity in the darkness. He decided that once released from solitary, he would gather the rowdiest inmates to form a theater group competing in the prison's talent program. Their play won first prize, and in the applause of an audience who couldn't leave their seats, because they too were inmates, Charles realized a truth he was born to stand on stage. It was prison itself, the place that seemed to have ended his life, that handed him the first key to redemption. And yet, before reaching the stage, lights, Dutton endured the full brutality of the American prison system. The gang beatings, the solitary cells, the contemptuous stares of the guards, all etched deeply into memory, later becoming the raw material for his hard-edged roles. No acting class could ever teach such unfiltered truth, and no one could understand how deep the darkness ran except the man who had once been swallowed whole by it. Solitary Confinement and the Fateful Book. After endless years in prison, it seemed Charles S. Dutton's life would remain trapped in violence, piling sentences, and arrogant walks into courtrooms. He had passed through youth with fists, knives, and defiance. A 17-year-old who committed murder became an inmate and reoffended only months after release, as if fate had locked him behind bars forever. But just when everything seemed sealed, when darkness confined him in a narrow, solitary cell, destiny arranged an unexpected turning point. What made a stubborn man change course was not a judge's lecture, nor the prison's iron discipline. It was simply a book mistakenly chosen. And from that moment, Charles was no longer just a survivor. He began his journey of rebirth. The story began when Dutton was punished with 6 days in solitary for refusing to work. In the American prison system, forcing inmates into menial jobs for a pittance was an unshakable rule. But Dutton would not comply. He flatly refused to sweep floors or scrub toilets for 35 cents a day. To him, it was not labor, but humiliation. His defiance immediately sent him to solitary, a punishment many considered the harshest. 6 days in a cold cell, no one to talk to, nothing to do but face himself. By regulation, each inmate in solitary was allowed one book. Charles intended to take The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, the revolutionary manual deemed essential for anyone calling himself a rebel. But fate seemed to test him. Instead of Fanon, he accidentally picked up an anthology of black playwrights. That mistake changed his entire life. In silence, he turned the pages. The sharp dialogue, the biting political satire, the stories both bitter and humorous by black playwrights made him laugh. For the first time in years, Dutton laughed not because of violence or defiant swagger. He laughed because of art. And from that laughter, he discovered an escape from the darkness he had never dared imagine. When the solitary door opened, Charles stepped out with a new resolve. He gathered the rowdiest inmates, men once his brawling partners, once branded tough guys in prison. Together, they formed a theater group rehearsing to compete in the prison's talent program. To many, it was laughable. A gang of fighters now on stage. But Dutton didn't care. He had found what stirred his heart, and he knew he had to follow it through. That performance took place in a peculiar auditorium. Every member of the audience was an inmate unable to leave their seats, even if they disliked it. Yet the miracle happened. They laughed, they listened, they applauded. That applause was not just recognition. It was baptism for Dutton. In that moment, he realized an undeniable truth. This is what I was born to do. Not killing, not defying, not drifting in darkness, but standing on stage using his voice, his emotions, his presence to move others. From that moment, Dutton began to study seriously. In prison, he completed his GED, equivalent to a high school diploma, and continued with college courses. This education opened doors to more formal artistic activities. He transformed from a defiant inmate into the leader of a prison theater group, into someone who honed his mind and emotions to reach the hearts of others. The following years in prison were no longer just days of confinement. They became a special school where Dutton learned academics, learned self-control, and nurtured his acting talent. He said every time he stepped onto a prison stage, he felt truly alive, free, even when surrounded by bars. If in his youth Charles believed he was born to fight and break rules, then after solitary, he believed he was born to perform. That transformation was not easy. It required courage to admit mistakes, to open himself to beauty, and to believe that even a man who had killed could find the light. The story of solitary confinement and the fateful book is not just an interesting anecdote about Charles S. Dutton. It is proof of how a person can change through the smallest moments. 6 days in solitary, a brutal punishment, became the chance for an inmate to discover a lifelong passion. A book chosen by mistake opened the door to Yale School of Drama, to Broadway, to Hollywood, and ultimately to the career of an Emmy-winning artist. Charles S. Dutton once said, "If it weren't for the stage, I would have died in prison." That was no exaggeration. For him, art was not just a career, but a lifeline. It turned a 17-year-old murderer into an artist, with a voice in society. It turned a rockhead boy from Baltimore into a man standing before millions. And it all began with a book mistakenly chosen in the darkness of solitary confinement. ROC, a groundbreaking sitcom, and the battle with Fox. When Charles S. Dutton walked out of prison, he carried not only a GED and a few college credits, but more importantly, a flame that had just ignited deep inside the stage. After years of darkness, art became his way of survival. From prison plays, he persisted in studying, eventually earning his place at the Yale School of Drama, the institution that trained some of America's finest talents. There, from a former inmate, Dutton transformed into a true artist. Yet even with the stage lights shining, the path to television remained full of obstacles. It was only when ROC appeared that the name Charles S. Dutton truly carved itself into the memory of the public. The idea for ROC came from a very ordinary figure, a sanitation worker named John Wood. Dutton saw in him resilience, blunt honesty, and stories that had never been told on American television about the black working class. In 1991, after years of struggling with supporting roles in Alien 3, Rudy, or on Broadway, Dutton decided to take a bold leap, a sitcom about a middle-class black family. But instead of meaningless laughter, ROC would tackle the toughest issues of society head-on. From the beginning, Dutton set strict conditions with Fox. He wanted full authority to cast the actors. He wanted scripts to be authentic, reflecting the real lives of black people in Baltimore. And above all, he wanted ROC not just as entertainment, but as a forum to address gun violence, teen pregnancy drugs, racism, and even economic hardship. Fox initially agreed, but they had not anticipated the ferocity with which Dutton would carry it out. From its very first season, ROC caused a stir. Audiences were both surprised and unsettled by a sitcom unafraid to confront issues other shows avoided. One episode depicted death by gun violence in the community. Another exposed police abuse of power. Others revealed the suffering of families destroyed by drugs. This was no longer lighthearted storytelling to enjoy after dinner. This was raw reality brought straight to the screen. But the biggest shock came in the second season, when ROC decided to broadcast all episodes live, something unseen in American television since the 1950s. Dutton, with his stage experience, led the entire crew into this risky experiment. A single mistake could ruin an episode. The pressure was immense, but it was precisely this that turned ROC into a phenomenon. Audiences tuned in not only for the story, but also to witness unprecedented daring. Yet behind the lights, the real battle was not on stage, but in the boardrooms. Fox, like all commercial networks, wanted a safe sitcom to attract advertisers. They wanted more laughs, fewer social messages. But Dutton refused. He argued with executives, even shouted in meetings. He would not compromise with falsehood. One insider recalled that after a script change, Dutton slammed the table and roared, "We are not making jokes. We are telling the truth." Tensions escalated. White producers could not understand why Dutton insisted on keeping the rough edges. They believed viewers did not want such harsh realities on their screens each night. But Dutton believed the opposite. Americans, especially black communities, needed to see their own stories. And if television failed to reflect that, it would remain a distorted mirror. It was not only Fox he clashed with. Dutton also had conflicts with co-stars. Rumors said that once tensions grew so high, production shut down for a day to cool the atmosphere. Yet despite the turbulence, ROC left its mark. For millions, it was a reminder that television could do more than make people laugh. It could provoke thought and even inspire action. The price, however, was steep. After only 3 seasons, Fox canceled ROC. The official reason was low ratings. But everyone knew the deeper cause was the clash between an artist determined to tell the truth and a system driven solely by profit. For Dutton, it was a painful blow. He had poured his heart into ROC, treating it as his brainchild, only to see it taken away because of numbers. Still, as always in his life, Dutton refused to be defeated. If prison could not break him, Hollywood could not either. After ROC ended, he continued to act, to direct. and later won an Emmy with The Corner, a series about Baltimore's poverty and drugs. In some way, ROC never died. It lived on in every project Dutton pursued, in his outspokenness against injustice, in the memory of audiences who once saw themselves reflected on screen. Looking back, ROC was not just a sitcom. It was a manifesto. It proved that a former inmate could seize creative power and challenge an entire system. And though ROC is no longer on air, its legacy endures proof that television can be a tool for truth, that art can go beyond entertainment to awaken society. Charles S. Dutton turned ROC into his weapon, a weapon unlike the fists of his youth, but far more dangerous to those who sought to cover up reality. And perhaps this was his greatest battle, no longer behind bars, but in the spotlight of Hollywood, where he dared to fight and left an indelible mark. Behind the scenes of ROC and the underlying conflicts, the bright stage lights the audience's laughter echoing every Sunday night. But behind the curtains of ROC was an entirely different world: tension conflicts, fiery confrontations that only years later began to surface. For Charles S. Dutton, the man who turned a sitcom into a socially charged work, the greatest sacrifice was not just clashing with Fox, but also the simmering conflicts with the crew and fellow actors. From production itself, ROC was unlike any other sitcom. Dutton demanded scripts to be so real that at times writers broke into a sweat in meetings. White writers used to lighthearted motifs could not understand why Dutton insisted on portraying poverty, guns, and drugs in a primetime comedy. One writer recalled how during a meeting, Dutton suddenly stood up, pointed at the script board, and growled, "You don't live in that neighborhood. I do, and I will not let you turn it into a cheap joke." The room fell silent, but that moment planted seeds of rifts within the team. The tension didn't stop with the writers. On set, rumors of heated arguments between Dutton and some co-stars spread like wildfire. Once a conflict grew so severe that filming had to pause for a day just to cool tempers. Crew members remembered how Dutton carried the intensity of Broadway onto a sitcom set, demanding absolute authenticity in every line, every look. For some actors used to a lighter sitcom style, this felt like unbearable pressure. As both lead actor and executive producer, Dutton was the conductor of every aspect. He decided which scripts passed, which episodes were reshot, and was even ready to discard others' ideas if they didn't fit his vision. This determination kept ROC's social spirit alive, but it also made him a thorn in many colleagues' eyes. One crew member admitted, "It wasn't easy working with Charles. He wanted to control everything." But honestly, that's what made ROC different. Tension also came from the live broadcast experiment. When Fox agreed to let ROC go live, the entire cast and crew were pushed to their limits. There was no room for mistakes. Each taping felt like a battle. Dutton, with stage experience, remained calm, but not everyone could handle it. Many nights actors rehearsed until exhaustion. Some cried backstage out of fear of the live pressure, but Dutton would coldly say, "This is real theater. If you can't take it, leave." Behind the disputes were also personal factors. Relationships within the cast weren't always smooth. Rumors suggested Dutton had a deep conflict with a female co-star over character direction. Though never publicly confirmed, many insiders believed it left scars so deep that some cast members barely spoke to him for years after ROC ended. What stands out is Dutton's later admission of his own faults. He confessed that at the time he still carried the hardness and temper of his prison past. He didn't know how to compromise, how to temper himself. He wanted everything his way, and at times, that made him authoritarian. "I was impatient, I was arrogant, but I will never regret it. I'd rather lose the show than lose the truth." Such honesty shocked many, for few artists admit their arrogance. But it reflected Dutton's essence, a man who lost his youth behind bars, now unwilling to accept any falsehood. To him, ROC was not just a sitcom, it was a declaration. And if the price was personal conflict, he would pay it. When ROC was canceled after its third season, the echoes of those conflicts lingered. Some co-stars never contacted him again. Some writers left bitter. But for Dutton, what mattered was that he preserved the soul of the show to the very end. And the audience, who once laughed and then fell silent at the truths on screen, remembered ROC as an indelible mark. Ironically, those very backstage conflicts added weight to ROC. The tension in production carried onto the screen, making each episode feel like a life-or-death struggle both on and off camera. And when viewers sensed that authenticity, they were witnessing not just a sitcom, but a small revolution in American television. Charles S. Dutton, the man who once wielded a knife at 17, now wielded a microphone on set, still with fierce determination, still uncompromising. But this time, instead of fighting with violence, he fought with art, with truth. And for that reason, even though backstage was riddled with conflict, ROC's legacy endures proof that sometimes to create true art, one must sacrifice harmony, even friendship. The short-lived marriage with Debbie Morgan. After the dazzling lights of ROC, after the tense battles with Fox, Charles S. Dutton stepped into another fight, this time not with prison or television executives, but with his own heart. The woman who entered his life igniting emotions both sweet and complicated was Debbie Morgan, the actress famous for her dimples and gentle gaze, who had captivated millions of viewers in All My Children. Their marriage in 1989 was once celebrated as a black power couple in Hollywood. But behind the red carpets and radiant smiles lay a sad story ending only a few years later, leaving emotional scars hard to erase. From the beginning, their relationship carried dramatic undertones. Debbie once admitted she was drawn to Dutton's troubled past. A man who had spent 12 years in prison once stood trial for murder, and yet had stepped into the spotlight as a television star. It was a journey both frightening and fascinating. Debbie recalled, "When I learned about his past, I wasn't afraid. On the contrary, there was something very alluring. He was like a warrior, a man I believed would never let himself be hurt. That very danger became a strange attraction, pulling her into a marriage many had warned would be turbulent. Their wedding was simple, not extravagant, but the press covered it as a milestone. A young, beautiful actress at the peak of her career, paired with a man whose prison number once replaced a business card. Yet as photographers captured their happy smiles, no one could foresee that only a few years later, those smiles would turn into tears. Entering marriage, both carried unhealed wounds. For Dutton, it was the memory of prison, toughness, temper, difficulty, and sharing emotions. For Debbie, it was a wounded childhood psychological scars that never fully faded. They thought love could heal everything, but reality was far harsher. Friends recalled that in the early years, both truly tried. Dutton often escorted Debbie to major events, always appearing as a proud husband. Debbie gave him absolute trust, willing to step back from the spotlight to be his support. But slowly differences in personality and ghosts from the past began to creep in. Debbie later admitted, "He was never violent, never. But Charles carried too much darkness. Sometimes I felt like he was still imprisoned, even though he had left prison long ago." Her words revealed the truth. The problem was not physical violence, but the emotional burdens Dutton had never learned to share. He was closed off, quick-tempered, and often carried work stress home. Meanwhile, Dutton's career became a double-edged sword. When ROC aired and gained momentum, he grew busier and more stressed. The live tapings, the battles with Fox, the constant struggle to bring Black community issues into scripts, all left him drained. By the time he came home, he had no energy left for Debbie. The silences between them grew longer. In 1994, the marriage officially ended. No children, no large shared assets, but it left deep scars on both. Debbie once described it as the greatest shock of my life. She remembered sitting on the floor crying uncontrollably from the sense of loss, as if the whole world had collapsed. Dutton, in a rare moment, also admitted fault. "I could never make her happy. I wasn't fit to be anyone's husband, and I will never let myself repeat that mistake again." That confession stunned the public. A man who had survived prison and challenged Hollywood bowed his head to admit helplessness in marriage. It revealed another side of Dutton, outwardly strong and unyielding, but inside carrying wounds that never healed, voids that could not be filled. After the divorce, Debbie Morgan continued her career, achieving success notably in Love and Basketball. As for Dutton, he kept his private life sealed, rarely speaking of relationships. Years later, he maintained the stance, no desire for commitment, no interest in marrying again. Perhaps that short-lived marriage left him with a bitter lesson about the fragility of happiness. Ironically, though, it lasted only a few years. His marriage to Debbie Morgan became one of the most intriguing revelations of Dutton's personal life. It was a time when he was not only battling Hollywood, but also battling his own heart. And like every other fight in his life, he walked away with wounds, but also with clarity. Public battles against racism and the truth after ROC. When ROC ended in 1994, many thought Charles S. Dutton would settle for supporting roles in Hollywood, or fade from the screen like so many others. But they were wrong. If in prison he once fought the system with his fists in Hollywood, Dutton chose a different weapon: his voice. And that voice was often so sharp it made the entire industry tremble. From the early 2000s, Dutton openly criticized discrimination against black actors. No euphemisms, no beating around the bush. He named studios, outright called out executives, and condemned how they treated actors fair on paper, but with contempt in reality. In a 2002 interview, he declared Hollywood talks about diversity like a slogan, but when we walk into the boardroom, we're still just strangers. His words rang like gunfire, and as expected, the storm came. Some studios quietly placed him on a blacklist. Invitations to roles suddenly disappeared. Half-signed contracts were canceled. But Dutton did not retreat. He recalled, "I lost my youth in prison. I'm not afraid of losing work. I'm only afraid of losing my voice." That defiance earned him respect from the black community, but it also made his career path steeper. Yet amid the storm, Dutton found his own way. In 2000, he directed The Corner, a miniseries about black life in Baltimore, based on David Simon's work. The show received critical acclaim and won Dutton an Emmy. Holding the golden statue, he choked up, "29 years ago, I won my first prize in a prison talent contest. Today I stand here again. It means America sometimes knows how to reward the wayward." But the spotlight did not erase the shadows. Dutton continued to clash with the system. He spoke bluntly about the absence of black producers, about how Hollywood distorted black images. Some colleagues advised him to tone it down to keep roles. But Dutton shook his head. "I stayed silent when I was locked in a cell. I will never stay silent again." His post-ROC career carried two faces. One side was artistic triumphs, from The Corner to guest appearances, In the Practice and Without a Trace. The other was losses from being sidelined by the industry giants. Dutton no longer appeared as often, but whenever he did, the roles were unforgettable, raw, intense, haunting. By 2024, at 73, Charles S. Dutton no longer chased fame. He chose projects carefully lived quietly, with an estimated net worth of about $9 million. Yet his past words and public battles with Hollywood are still remembered. They are not just the story of an actor, but the manifesto of a man who rose from inmate to star and dared to challenge an entire system. So what remains, after all? Not only the Emmy statues, not only the sitcom ROC. Dutton's greatest legacy is Spirit refusing to let the past define the future, and refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice. A man who once swore he would never bow in prison became a symbol of defiance in glittering yet prejudiced Hollywood. And when his story is told, people do not see just an actor, but a warrior. A warrior who used art as his weapon, to remind the world that truth always matters, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Age 73, from shackles of the past to an enduring legacy. Charles S. Dutton once stepped out of Yale to conquer Broadway, with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and The Piano Lesson. He left his mark on the big screen with Alien 3. Rudy then reached the pinnacle by winning an Emmy for The Corner, a collaboration with David Simon, which paved the way for masterpieces like The Wire. Such a career is enough for anyone to hold their head high. But what people remember more than the roles is the man behind them. At 73, Dutton no longer chases the spotlight. With an estimated net worth of $9 million, he lives securely, but never chose the path of retreat. Instead, he carefully selects projects appearing as a guest star or sitting in the director's chair where he can shape the message. More importantly, he still speaks boldly. In recent interviews, Dutton has not hesitated to revisit racial injustice, to point out Hollywood's blind spots, and to urge the younger generation never to lose themselves. Perhaps his greatest legacy is not in Emmy statues or shocking scripts, but in the image of a man who once wore a prison uniform, now standing before the public to say, "The past cannot define the future. Only courage and truth can." At 73, Dutton has turned his life into a message. A living proof that people can change, that art can redeem, and that truth, even bitter, has tial. If you've stayed with us until now, surely the story of Charles S. Dutton has touched you. A journey from the darkness of prison to the spotlight of the stage, from despair to an enduring legacy. And there are many more stories like this waiting to be told. Secrets never before revealed behind Hollywood's glittering lights. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. Every bit of your support is the motivation for us to keep bringing you shocking journeys, groundbreaking revelations, and the truest perspectives.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.